Detroit was once the seat of the world's greatest economic empire, the auto industry. Whether you came from Southern Europe, the Middle East, or the American South, the factories were always hiring and the pay was good. But as this empire of cars weakened and crumbled, the city's economy began to revolve around a new business, illegal drug distribution.
The day I arrived in Detroit, I was shown two bodies that had been placed inside of the trunk of cars at the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. And the stench, the bodies were decomposed and you could see the maggots. And that was my first trip to Detroit. And it was one of the most devastating experiences I ever experienced.
67 is as if it was biblical, as if someone blew out the light, my life turned upside down. The armies of addicts, it was like unbelievable. We never recovered. People breaking in our houses, snatching gold.
All the places I had visited, Detroit to me was the most out of control that I had ever experienced.
Between 1965 and 1970, violent crime more than doubled in the United States. Why this happened has never been fully explained, but the confluence of drugs and the breakdown of social control associated with the civil rights movement and the war in Vietnam were certainly key factors. Nowhere was more out of control than Detroit, Michigan, which had suffered the deadliest riot of the 60s and had become the murder capital of the country by 1971. In the spring of 1972, the Bureau of Narcotics sent John Sutton to Detroit on a special assignment to infiltrate and bring down the city's largest black heroin dealers.
Some of the intelligence that we were picking up on indicated there was a mafia operating in Detroit, what they call a black mafia.
Agent Sutton arrived in Detroit to find a city divided. On the one hand, Detroit had the most thriving black middle class in the country, mostly thanks to the auto industry, and many people were living the good life.
Birds are singing and the children are playing. There's plenty of work and the bosses are paying. Not a
David Ruffin was a genius. That's the summary of where we were at. In 1965, there was plenty of work and the bosses were paying.
The community had beautiful homes. Everybody was drinking good whiskey. Everybody was eating good. They were taking trips. And I saw a kind of a black affluence that I had never seen in other cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, and places. Everybody was driving a new car, and naturally American-made car, big Cadillacs, Fleetwood Bromes, Eldorados.
This was the neighborhood to grow up in. A zillion young girls to highlight.
Life was good in those neighborhoods.
Everybody had jobs, and they had their parents in the home.
You ate good. You had 500 different little local eateries that were good. You didn't have to go downtown.
On the other hand, it was a city where entire police precincts were overrun by heroin dealers and stick-up men.
I immediately detected that there was something missing here, that there was a tremendous erosion of the political system and erosion of the police department, erosion of the religious system in the city.
The police was trying to come down hard on, they called them the Big Four, and they was always coming through the neighborhood trying to intimidate the blacks. They'd pull us out, take us to Bel-Air, and put us out there in the water and shoot at us. I was one of them that they put out there and shot at.
I drove over around Livernois and I heard what I thought was firecrackers. This was pre-4th of July, and I was later told that it was the 10th precinct. Two agents who had been previously assigned here had been relocated out of death threats. They had put contracts out for their life. I'd seen the Pruitt-Igoe housing area of St. Louis, the Cabrini Greens, the Robert Taylor in Chicago, the Front in Baltimore. I'd seen the Watts, Nicholson Gardens, the Jordan Down Project, some of the real bad neighborhoods. And even down in Mexico, Tijuana and Calexico, the most fearful part of my life working drugs was here in Detroit. Some of the most violent people that I've met were here in Detroit.
Around we go, where the world's headed, nobody knows.
Detroit had few black police officers in the 1950s, so the department had a hard time infiltrating the city's burgeoning drug infrastructure.
That they were having a lot of, during that time, a lot of problems, and a lot of black guys were in traffic selling heroin.
I was sent here to do a police officer who apparently worked narcotics and had gone into the dope dealing business by the name of Marzette. And he was a kingpin in Detroit.
Henry Marzette was a hometown boy and Korean War veteran when he entered the police academy. Starting off as an undercover narcotics cop under Detective Vincent Persante in the 1950s, Marzette set arrest records working in the Livernois and Tyerman area.
Recruited him out of the police academy, put him in business, big Cadillac, fine wardrobe, and he was like setting records, busting guys.
But soon started playing both sides of the fence and was convicted of corruption in the late 50s.
And when he went to prison, he began to work for the Italians as a muscle and so forth. But even bigger than that, he made his connection.
After a short stint in prison, Marzette came home, determined to take over the streets.
He knew the system, and that's what made him very good. He was the new drug czar from the dark side, and he was the man.
Marzette made his first major move in 1960, when he had 3 young prostitutes lure a major West Side dealer named Mississippi Red to a motel room, where Marzette was waiting with a shotgun.
Now, I met Marzette in '67. I had an uncle who was big in the street life, and I was in total awe. And he left his big black Fleetwood Brougham Dove Park while he was shopping, and the cops didn't ticket him, which was unheard of. That was absolutely unheard of at that time for a black man.
1970, Henry Marzette makes his final bid to control the streets of Detroit. He calls a meeting of top heroin dealers known as the West Side 7. He proposes that they work together to purchase and distribute heroin without the Italian mafia, who controlled a group known as the East Side 12, made up of mostly white, high-level dealers with black lieutenants. The alliance falls apart when certain dealers won't bow down to Marzette, kicking off the deadliest drug war in Detroit's history. During this time, Marzette was stricken with kidney disease, and on his deathbed, perhaps to make amends in some way for the destruction he had wrought on Detroit, he had his chief hitman, James Moody, executed and put into the trunk of a car, bringing the drug war to a halt. As the auto industry slowly faded and Motown Records fled to Los Angeles, the economic vacuum was filled by a new spirit, the spirit of crime.
They made me a ward of the state, 10. That's when they came to my mother's house and took me, because they said that my mother couldn't control me. Nobody wanted to be my friend unless I gave them something. So then I learned how to be mean and nasty to the ones that always tried to play me for money or food or...
Detroit's industrial base had begun to die by the early 1950s, leaving a pool of unemployed men to populate the streets.
These are not kids. They're men who need jobs for a living. It's estimated that 1/3 of Detroit's inner-city workforce is unemployed.
Between 1953 and 60 alone, the East Side lost 71,000 out of 102,000 industrial jobs.
It's just not enough jobs. What are they going to do when they stop the war and bring jazz home? There's no jobs. This is what causes the crime rate to be so high.
Traditionally, Detroit reflects the best or the worst of the nation's economy at any given time. Right now, the unemployment rate here is more than twice what it was 2 years ago, and by all indicators, it is still rising.
Ain't no work, man, that's all. Where people want to pay you for what you're worth, you know. And every man, I think, knows his worth. I know, man. There's nothing else to say. That's it. I need some money.
Detroit's auto plants were microcosms of the city itself, and everything that was happening in the streets was happening on the factory floor. Agent Sutton infiltrated Chrysler's Dodge Main plant to buy drugs from 2 white foremen.
I was introduced to a white informant who worked at Dodge Main, and he wanted to do 2 guys who were selling heroin and cocaine, and they were white males selling dope over at Dodge Main. And I asked him, why did he want to do these guys? And he said something that I found that later came to pass. He indicated that All of the automotive plants are cities within themselves, and that drugs are rampant inside of the plants. Drugs, prostitution, number running, fencing, everything that you can think of existed in the automotive plant. He wanted to immobilize these two dope dealers because he believed people selling drugs who worked for the automotive industry would cause the complete destruction of the automotive industry. He stated that cars that were assembled on Mondays and Fridays were lemons, that they were no good because of the drug use.
Sutton's chief target, Henry Marzette, had died of kidney failure just before his arrival, so Agent Sutton turned his attention to Marzette's remaining lieutenants and the remnants of the West Side Seven.
Within a day of arriving in Detroit, Marzette died apparently of natural cause, and Devil Jackson had gotten shotgun in the face the night before. And there was some indication that the person that killed Devil Jackson was one of the informants that I would be working with. We had Eddie Jackson, we had another Jackson by the name of, I think it was Ernest Jackson, had a street name of Boogie Bear.
I know when I was in the Defenders, I was assigned to represent a guy. His real name was Arnold Wright. Pretty Rick was a pimp, is what he really was, and he was from our neighborhood. He was from around Mumford.
Milwaukee Jack, who was Marzette's lieutenant. And I bought heroin from John Mays, Milwaukee Jack, on several occasions. During the time that I was here, they were averaging almost like 2 murders a day. And then the weekend would come around, there would be 12 on that weekend. The dope dealers had guns like I'd never seen. They had a saying that it's better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
The 10th precinct was where the city's black elite mixed with the underworld to form a strange nexus of black power, crime, and social disorder unique to Detroit.
I saw people driving by, black males driving by with guns and, 45 automatics, the old military 1911 type, and they would lock around in the chamber and hold it up and give the power to the people sign.
Agent Sutton spent only 90 days in Detroit, but in that brief time crossed paths with a rogues gallery of characters.
And when I went to his house, he had like about 25 buyers in his house to buy heroin, and I was low on the pecking order. And when the number reached 25, he went to the stash and came back with a shopping bag full of heroin.
My brother was addicted to that stuff, and I seen what he was going through, and I was like, whoa.
One of the things that was frightening was that the people who were manning these dope houses were addicts. And there was a reputation that, to watch them because they had a tendency to go on the nod, and when they come out of the nod, they would forget what they were doing and they could easily shoot you.
Charlie used to just give me money to sit on his porch to make sure that the